Welcome to the 37th edition of Life Update Emails with Alex, narrated by your humble host, Jake Voss, which is me. When you hear this sound, consternation. Turn the page. After I finished crafting the last Life Update email, Joe and I talked amongst the night air atop a dead tree about many things as we looked over the city. I must say, it ranks pretty high as far as talks with Joe go. After that, we then watched My Hero Academia till 2:30 in the morning, which was good. The next morning, I did that work. Then Duncan called me up and was like,
"Hey, I've got an extra ticket. Want to come to a rodeo?"
And I was like, well, I haven't ever been to one of those before, and I mean, free is a pretty good price, so I might as well, and thus I attended. Now that I've done one, I think I can say I don't think rodeos are my thing. I mean, it's mildly interesting and all, watching people try to rope animals atop animals, but I think the real appeal is the Republican/redneck vibe that very thoroughly saturates the whole event. Now, it's not that I mind that, it's just that I'm too politically agnostic and too much of a nerd to fit into that group. Hence, it was a meh experience for me. Still, glad I did it though. Anyway, after that, I worked on editing my last Life Update email, and then I watched some anime before going to bed. Consternation. I then proceeded to get a grand total of 1 hour and 30 minutes of sleep before going off to hike with the squad. It was a tolerable hike. I mean, there was like a solid hour there where everyone inquired about my non-existent romantic life, and hence instead made up a hypothetical romantic life of Alex, which was actually worse. Ha ha. Anyway, it was 98% death, but I lived. I then hiked up this stupidly hard path on my own, which was a big oof. But I finally made it to the top, only to discover the only way to the mountaintop I needed to get to was this ledge, about a foot, maybe two, thick, and then a sheer drop of 100 plus feet of death. And see, I've already shimmied along death edges, if you remember, and it wasn't the most enjoyable of all experiences. Hence, because I actually learned from my mistakes, I didn't do that, and instead sucked it up and hiked all the way back down without climbing the actual mountain I was trying to get to. I will, however, mention, I got really close to dying once more because, see, there was this super big, steep snowbank. Okay, wait. Here, let me flesh this all out so it makes more sense. So, we're trying to climb this mountain, right? And basically, the established path that would ensure we get to the top requires we drop down into this ravine of sorts before climbing all the way back up the other side. So my thought process was, less work equals less work. And thus, instead of dropping into the valley and losing the elevation I had gained, I was like, well, why don't I climb up this other mountain and then go over the ridge line to reach the mountain I need to get to the top of? We'll call the mountain I need to get to the top of Mountain A, and the mountain beside it, Mountain B. So, I climbed Mountain B, right? And might I say, it was an arduous climb. About 2/3 of it was about as straight up as you can get without just straight rock climbing. Plus, there was a snowbank in the middle of the climb which was so steep I had to dig my fingers in, just to get and keep traction. And I must say, my fingers got so cold. Like, holy cow, you underestimate just how cold your fingers will get, but then you're clinging to a snowfield for dear life, so there's not really a, I would like to take that choice back please, option. Ha ha. Anyway, that's not how I got quite close to dying. It was just mucho sketch. Thankfully, there were a few rocks that peeked out of the snowfield, so I was occasionally able to stay on one of them and let my fingers warm up. Anyway, I climbed up this stupidly steep incline and then climbed up a pseudo-steep incline the rest of the way to the top of Mountain B. And I must say, by this point, I had been climbing for 2.5 hours or so, and I was so tired. So yeah, after chilling on top of the Mountain B for like 15 minutes and regaining my strength, I then tread a 34% sketchy path to reach Mountain A, and I was greeted with this. Consternation. Which is not easily submittable, and I would have to go full rock climbing mode with a backpacking backpack on to climb it. I've also done that before, and I ain't making that mistake again. Ha ha. I want to be able to yell, "Not dead yet," for many years to come. Ha ha. So, yeah. Basically, after hiking for 3+ hours, I found I couldn't reach Mountain A, and I was the big sad. So upon realizing I would have to go down the same stupid steep way I came up, I looked to my left and saw a very large and very steep snowbank. And see, I had never slid down a snowbank before, but I very heavily considered doing it for the first time, as I wished to follow my earlier guiding principle of less work equals less work. However, upon staring at its excessive steepness and the fact that there wasn't any leveling out at the bottom, it just went straight into rocks, I barely decided against it. And gosh, in hindsight, I am so glad I did. I actually think I would have died, and the reason I came to that conclusion is because after traveling most of the way back down, I hit this point where there was a snowbank less steep than the one aforementioned, and also a lot shorter, and I needed to cross it to get down. So, if you can't tell, the edge of the snowbank I was in front of just had a thin layer of snow before a 15-foot drop, so I had to jump to where the snowbank was thicker so I didn't just fall through. So, after a bit of hesitation, I jumped, and gosh, it was so slippery. It was way harder to stop myself than I had thought, and I barely didn't hit the rocks at the bottom, because it leveled out some. Thus, I'm like 99% certain if I had gone down the steeper, longer snowbank that didn't level out at the bottom, I would have been dashed against the rocks quite literally. So yeah, in hindsight, I almost died on a hike once again, but thankfully I didn't, and here I am. Look at me, learning from my mistakes. Ha ha. Consternation. So, yeah, that was the big sketch, but I made it back alive. I then talked with Duncan and Molly on the way down, and, made Molly cry, so, heh, pro move on my part, haha. Once I got back from that hike, at like 8, I basically just collapsed and did nothing significant. I then proceeded to sleep for 10 hours, before going off-roading with Sam and David, but David's Jeep broke, so we didn't end up doing Death Mountain, or whatever it's called. Which I am actually super glad, because I seriously doubt Sam's truck could have made it up there. Sorry, Sam. Oh, and we plowed through this mud puddle, but Sam left his skylight open, and the truck got covered in mud, inside and out. Ha ha, it was great. That wasn't Death Mountain, by the way. That was the easy part before it. But yeah, instead, we did an easier trail, which was still really fun, but not so the car is going to roll stressful, so it was a way better experience overall. Wink. It was a pretty good time. Anyway, once we got back from that, I took Grace to some store so she could buy something. I can't remember. And then that night I recorded the last life update email and sent it off to Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hello there.
That Sunday morning, I joined Duncan and his sister, whose name I can't remember, haha, at an Orthodox church service. I was going to take a picture, but it seemed pretty disrespectful, so I abstained. Consternation. So, yeah, the liturgy was pretty cool, honestly. It was super reverent, there was a bunch of incense, and there was even this part where we all bowed when they brought out the Eucharist. As Joe likes to often point out, I bowed to bread. Okay, but to be fair, I actually do believe in the real presence at this point. So I really do believe in the Eucharist is Christ in some sense. And if any of you want to know my reasons for that conclusion, just email me and I'll let you know. Wink. Anyway, I did that and it was pretty great. After that, me and Father Gebral got talking and then some other people joined in and I asked them some questions, which were sort of answered. I don't know. There were like 3 different people trying to answer the question, so it got kinda confusing. But yeah, overall, a good time. After that, I stopped by home before heading to the Myers for some reason. I actually can't remember. Maybe their graduation? It is still weird that Charity has graduated before me when she's like 2 years younger. It's at least 7% vexing. So yeah, we played a lot of volleyball, which was good, and then we also did some ultimate frisbee. before we all kind of chilled inside and Joe and Jake tried to define a game contrary to the Wittgensteinian position that had a term that was not definable. However, they did manage a subjective definition of game which was basically a tautology, but they still enjoyed the rhetorical defeat of my position even if they didn't actually defeat it, and thus I think they reveled in the experience. After that, we went to the basement and watched half of Hamilton before I decided to go home because that was a waste of time. But then, upon going home, Ben convinced me to binge the end of Dr. Stone with him, so I ended up wasting my time anyway. So, yeah, that's how I ended that day. The following day, I worked before meeting up with Josh, Noah, and Joe to just hang at a park. The only important thing to note from that event is that we raced and I was the fastest. Wink. Not to brag at all. Though Joe did start faster, I suppose that ought to be mentioned. Anyway, after that, I participated in what Joe has christened Brawl Boys, which I think is apt, so I will adopt it. We also did some Minecraft, which was tolerable, but we basically gave Josh god powers and he just messed with us the whole time. However, it was also a big sad day, as it was Ben Walston's last day, and he had been a part of the Brawl Boys back when we actually watched anime. So yeah, it was a decent time overall, and we gave him a send-off of sorts, and then I got home by 1:30. The next day, I had work before I attended Ratio Christi, wherein we had a guy named Alexander join us for the first time, and I am the much happy that he did. He is the mucho knowledgeable as regards all things Catholic, as he is a Catholic convert himself, and has made things a lot clearer. He's provided some really good arguments for the papacy from the Bible, as well as for other stuff which has been mucho enlightening. So yeah, the Catholic legend of Alexander has now arrived on the Ratio Christi scene. So yeah, I basically just skipped out on games and talked with him for 4 hours before we all joined in and played this pirate game Liam brought. After that, me and Joe went on a drive and ended up picking up Ben, wherein he proceeded to state all the things about me he found vexing for quite some time, which was mildly informative, and hopefully Joe knows what he's getting into now. Still, the conversation overall was worthwhile. Once we got home, I slept and waited for the next day to come upon my unconscious self. Consternation. Okay, have any of you thought about just how stupid weird sleeping is? I mean, you basically just shut down for a time and cease to have control over your being. Like, that's real weird. I would avoid it if I could, but I don't have much of a choice. So I suppose I'll just keep sleeping. Anyway, the next day I felt pretty sick, so I canceled social events and tried to power through and still get some things done. I felt pretty trash, but I managed to dump the old car parts I had, as well as get my emissions test done. Yeah, I think pushing through like that just made my sickness worse, because I was basically down for the count for the rest of the week. Yeah, getting home, I just watched anime in my diseased and mentally deprived state. I got bad sleep the following night, as one might expect, and so I spent the whole day watching anime, but I did manage to use my meager brain power to do something mildly productive, which was to draw this half of a phoenix. See, for a while I've been wanting to paint a phoenix on my car, as it's kinda a victory lap since I finally conquered that car. So I decided that, since I can't do much else, I might as well try the foreign art of, well, art. So yeah, I did art, and then watched Demon Slayer, an anime, with Ben and my cousin Toby, who was staying at my house at the time. But yeah, not much productive stuff was done at that time. The next day, Ben converted my drawing into Illustrator for me and then mirrored it, which I'm thankful for because that would have taken me a while to figure out how to do. Consternation. After that, I basically spent the day turning that into better art. I actually think it looks pretty good, honestly. Plus, I just had these canvases lying around from dumpster diving, so the project didn't cost me anything. So yeah, I made a triptych and now it lives in my D&D basement. So yeah, other than making that in a slow and inefficient fashion, 'cause sick, I watched more Demon Slayer, cleaned my dungeon, and talked with William, which we had been trying to do for ages, so glad that happened. That night, I got like an hour and a half of sleep before really bad abdominal pain, which kept me up for the next 3 hours. I almost decided to go to the hospital. It was really bad. But hey, I'm not dead, so whatever it probably wasn't anything damaging, right? My logic is infallible. Once that pain subsided, I got to bed at like 6 in the morning and slept poorly till 2. Yeah, that was a sucky experience. The next day, I worked on making a giant silhouette cutout for painting my car, which was actually so much harder than I thought it would be. I had to cut like 20 sheets of paper and tape them all together. It actually took ages. So yeah, I made that and then watched the Demon Slayer movie with Toby and Ben before heading to sleep. The following morning, I still felt sick, but I soldiered through and finished making my stencil and then getting it stuck to my car with sticky tack, which unfortunately left these circles of not painted parts, which sucks, but what can a guy do, right? And yeah, after like 6 hours of work that day, I finally got my car painted. Consternation. I have gotten many a complaint that my Phoenix doesn't have a tail, but hey, I ain't changing it now. I also painted my hubcaps, which I personally think is pretty great, but you're free to disagree. Wink. So yeah, at this point, I was on the tail end of sickness, so after getting that painted, I drove Grace and Annalise to the store so they could get some clay. I also caught up with Jordan before rounding out the night by playing some Brawl with Joe and Caleb. On Monday, I went back to work, did a bit of college research, played Brawlhalla with the squad, and then I did what they had deemed impossible. I built a flying Minecraft ship. Now, I concede it didn't look nearly as good as I had imagined, but I did invent my own flying machine. Like, I taught myself from the ground up how to make this. At the start, I didn't even know how a piston worked. So yeah, my flying machines aren't as efficient as they could be, hence they can carry less blocks, which means the ship can't look as good. But oh well. I still did it, and they said it was impossible. Also, it worked on the first try, so that was also cool. I had like 6 different flying machines that all worked together in sync, so yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. Wink. The next day, I went to work, which was boring and average and all that jazz. I then went to Ratio Christi, wherein we ate burgers, which were decent, played games, and talked with Alexander about Catholicism again, because he is the mucho smart. I then worked on Mass, and I listened to OnScript and learned that people are trees too. Wait, no, I mean trees are people too. Got that a bit mixed up there. Anyway, yeah, the scholar was basically arguing that since the Bible says things like the trees will clap their hands, that the trees must be agents, along with the rest of nature, and thus we must be super environmentalists. Consternation. Anyway, yeah, it was among the more stupid of talks I had yet heard from people with PhDs. So yeah, I experienced that, and then I arrived at home and read some papers on the canon, and then Toby joined me and we played Brawlhalla with the gang. I woke up early the next morning for some reason, which was something. I had a reason, but I can't remember it. Oh well. I used the time to talk with Mom, and we discussed things like why she should actually believe in the real presence, cause, let's be honest, it's pretty obvious, except, philosophically, that it's kind of like death. But yeah, we talked and connected some, which I've been prioritizing because Caleb told me to. Then read some more papers on scholarly stuff and went to Jake's bachelor party, which was decent. We played Ultimate Frisbee, which was good, and then ate Chick-fil-A, which was also good. After that, we decided to be dropped off somewhere in Loveland and try to race each other to a certain spot, but it turned out the spot chosen was one where only my group, Joe, Benj, and I, didn't know. So while the other 2 groups got there really fast, we just walked in the wrong direction for ages. So yeah, it was less than maximally fun, but later we did get to smack the girls with beach balls. It was redeeming. Oh yeah, Jake got married, hence the bachelor party. So yeah, that ended, and Caleb, Noah, Joe, and I ended up at the last minute deciding to drive up to Horsetooth and chill for a bit. After which, Noah had to leave, but Caleb, Joe, and I stayed up till 5 trying to beat each other in guessing anime intros. So yeah, that was surprisingly entertaining. Consternation. The next day, I was sleep deprived, as one might expect. I donated plasma before talking with Esther, which was good, though short. I also talked with Sydney for quite a while, which was also good. By that point, it was like 10, 11-ish, so I watched a bit of anime before going to bed. And then as I was falling asleep, I suddenly realized at 2 a.m. that Jake and Charity's wedding was today, not tomorrow. So I wrote a sleep-deprived letter, got them a gift, which may be a strong word for 2 hunks of plastic, but I did something at least. So yeah, then I went to said wedding, talked about advanced mathematical concepts because Jake is friends with a nerd whose company I thoroughly enjoyed, and then a lot of death happened, which I don't really want to recount. It was too painful. Anyway, yeah, Jake is now wed, so that happened. After the ceremony, we all went to Chick-fil-A and ate and talked. After that, I drove to Joe's house with Noah, wherein he basically was like, Alex, get married. Okay, his argument was just that I should heavily consider it, but still, To which I was like, but please no? And yeah, that's how that conversation went. So yeah, then we all played Minecraft and Brawlhalla into the night. The next day, I joined Alexander and attended a Latin Mass, which was fancy. Oh, also, sometime before this, I went to this church to check out some relics. Guess I forgot about that. But yeah, I did that. My insignia is now a third-class Thomas Aquinas relic, so that's pretty fancy. Wink. Here are some pictures. So yeah, I did that and participated in the Mass, which involved mucho kneeling, but they have these cushion kneeling things, so that makes it not nearly as painful. After that, I went to Neo and Sydney's house early, because Braden was going to start teaching me how to ride a motorcycle, which he did. It was at least 10% informative. So yeah, we did that, and then played D&D, and yeah, we're still in hell. And then we did a Bible study, which was meh. After that, we played some Halo, and then went on a pretty long walk. We meaning me, Neo, and Carter. We talked about a lot, so that was pretty good. Consternation. The following day, I had work, which was like all other work days. I got home, watched some anime, read some papers, joined in on some Brawl, wherein a very tragic thing happened. My Kia got 3-stocked by Joe's Zul, which, per our agreement, meant I had to play Zul, which I refused to otherwise do. So yeah, I lost a great deal that day. I will forever mourn my defeat. Takes a moment to sulk in the corner. What am I supposed to do with that? As a narrator, like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to actually take a moment to sulk in the corner? Like, am I supposed to narrate like what that sounds like? I'm genuinely confused. What am I supposed to do with that? So yeah, I'm just gonna move on and keep narrating, because I don't know what to do with that. After that, we played Minecraft, and Joe was so bored he wandered through my labyrinth and found my secret tunnel to the Nether, which was very sad. After making all that work pointless, he then accompanied me and Caleb to a late-night drive to the Waffle House, wherein we had some pretty good conversations. Oh, and man, there was this high waiter who would not get off our case. It's actually pretty funny in hindsight. He apparently had a very hard time getting it through his skull that we were virtuous people. So yeah, we did that until some ungodly hour, and then went to sleep. The next morning I worked, as usual, but I didn't listen to any podcast episodes. I just spent the 5 hours thinking, which was actually pretty great. Ratio Christi was pretty boring that night. Nothing influential was even discussed, but we did play a game of Catan, which I won, so that was great. I like winning. After that, I met up with Joe at like 12, and we drove to the Horsetooth Reservoir, and just chilled on the dock. What I found later was illegal chilling, and talked, and I think it's probably the best conversation we've had to date. It was the mucho better. The following day of work ensued, and then I skipped the youth group, for like the 4th time in a row, to facilitate the clone meetup, wherein I had Karina and Katie from hiking meet each other. It was definitely awkward and forced at points, but overall, it was good. Oh, right. Well, except for one point. See, the hiking group had developed this stupid thing where my ideologies are my girlfriend's, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So, when Katie started to share all the intricate details of such a conversation with Caleb, Karina, and Joe, I might have slightly freaked out, and I sprayed lemonade all over both Karina and Katie. It was super embarrassing, and I would rather not relive it. I didn't care that I sprayed Karina as much, because we were decent friends, and she's pretty forgiving, but I don't know Katie all that well, so that was a big oof. So yeah, that was not an enjoyable experience, but otherwise, the time was pretty good. Well, with the notable exception of the urinal relic plan, but we don't need to talk about that. So yeah, we did that, and then the squad decided to drive to the Risk Canyon, which was an okay experience. There weren't a lot of good conversations, but nevertheless, there were some decent vibes, so that was good enough. The following day, not a ton happened. I donated plasma, and then hosted D&D, and that's about the totality of it. Consternation. The next day, I met up with Father Gabriel, the Orthodox priest I mentioned earlier, and we talked for a few hours. I posed some questions he couldn't answer, but he was gracious about it and humbly admitted he wasn't quite sure, so I must say that was admirable. After we got back from that, I noticed that there was just a free TV sitting in someone's yard, so I snagged it, and now I have a TV in my basement. Yay! I then went and played soccer, picking up Benj in the process, and yeah, that was tiring, but good. I'm quite far from being in peak condition physically, but I can still mostly play. Now, once that ended, I needed to drop Benj off, but he was attending Joe's family movie night, so I drove him there and was dropping him off when Mrs. James was like, "You're now invited." So I joined the movie night, which was mostly meaningless, but at least they watched Infinity War, which is a great movie. Wink. I left when they started discussing something so meaningless I've blocked it from my memory. I then started on the prototype for this life update email, which Jake proceeded to reject, which was big sad, and then I went to bed. It's true. It was terrible. It was this really awkward, strange, role. I don't even know how to describe it. It was terrible. You should all be you the listeners, the common folk, should all be very glad that I am not currently reading that, because that was big sad. It was, not something This is just me, the narrator, talking. It was not good. Anyway, to continue. The next morning, I went and donated plasma once again before attending a one-shot Joe was running.
Editor's note, Joe was not running it.
Where we were stupidly overpowered characters on a suicide mission. It was okay, but he had this boss that just hit me. No save, no nothing. So that was a big vexing. Because my character was built to basically not be hit, and he was just like, I'm going to ignore all that. But afterward, there was another boss that didn't just auto-hit, so at least my build mattered somewhat. Wink. So yeah, I did that until late at night, and then Joe, Neo, and I decided to do a PvP where me and Neo tried to kill Joe's druid with potentially infinite life. We both knew we wouldn't win, but we decided to try anyway, and, as was expected, we couldn't kill him. It was really a battle of attrition, but he would have killed us eventually, so at 3 or so I was like, guys, there's no point. We know how this goes. So we called it. The next day, I did my normal D&D in the Neos campaign, where we finally got out of hell. We then had some good theological conversations instead of Bible study, which I was down for, and then I read another scholarly paper on the canon before Neo and I went on a drive through Rist Canyon, which was quite good. Maybe the best conversation I've had with Neo yet. Upon arriving back at my house, I invited Joe over, and we hung out in my dungeon and watched some of My Hero until about 2. The next day was Monday, so, as per usual, work was engaged in. However, monumentally, I finished listening to the last episode of On Script. See, On Script is a biblical studies podcast where scholars invite other people with PhDs in either biblical studies or theology to talk about X topic. It's pretty dry at times, but super informative. Plus, the hosts give everyone a hearing and just listen and ask questions instead of trying to prove the guests wrong, which helps you get a good idea of what the guest scholars actually believe. So yeah, I finished that and have now listened to about 250 hours of biblical studies podcasts. So if you have questions about the Bible, I'm your guy. Anyway, I then brought up the squad along for some Ultimate Frisbee with a hiking friend group, which was good, but I got a bad cramp in my calf again, which was a bit sad. It was a pretty epic game though. I had some good moments, but I was so sad when Benj and I both laid out for a Frisbee and he got it. I was so close. Anyway, after Frisbee, we all tried a speed run of the Minecraft variety, but what we actually did was anything but speedy. Yeah, we eventually gave up because the fortress was actually impossible to find. After that, Ben, my brother Ben, stuck around and we did some anime guessing until like 3 in the morning, and I think he enjoyed it. Consternation. The next day, I worked and kind of just listened to random podcasts trying to figure out where to go next. After that, Ben took me to Alley Cat, this hip coffee shop he's been digging, and actually that's where I am right now as I write this, because I actually dig the vibe. Anyway, he showed me Alley Cat, and then I went to Ratio Christi, which was Katie's last one before she moved to Texas. So yeah, we all hopped in Noah's car. Katie and I might have illegally rode in the trunk, but yeah, we picked up a bunch of different food items, ate them, and then without Alan, because he's being responsible now, which is a very big sad, we all drove up to Estes and did a night hike, which isn't quite right as it was more like a night meander. But yeah, that was good. Got to have some good conversations, and I had a small character building moment. See, on the way back down, Katie and Liam were singing hymns and stuff, and I was like, nah, I ain't doing that. But then I was like, well, but why aren't I joining in? And I realized my reasons sucked, so I ended up joining in on some of the singing, despite the fact that it makes me uncomfortable. So yeah, look at me, growing as a person. I then went to work the next morning, went through some more podcast searching, and then attended a youth group wherein we did normal youth group things, but for some reason my leg hurt, which was a bit sad. I then talked with Dad some, which was decent. Before I went over to Joe's to play video games, and then I realized this was a surreal waste of time, so I left and slept instead. And technically, that was 2 days ago, but I'm actually going to end it there because yesterday I finished my D&D campaign, an inconceivable venture, and I think that deserves an intro, so I will wait to write about that. Wink. So for now, that's all there is to be said. Hope you all are alive, and as always, down to hear from you if you have some time. This has been Life Update Email 37 with Alex, featuring your host, Jake Voss, signing off.